They voted me out of the family board to keep 100% of the profits, but they forgot I own the factory that supplies their raw materials. I raised the prices by 400% overnight. Dad called screaming. I whispered, "Business is business, right, Dad?" Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To understand why my father is currently screaming into his phone, you have to understand the architecture of Vane architectural glass. On the surface, we are a single cohesive empire. But structurally, we are two different worlds, separated by 20 miles of highway and a massive tax bracket. There is the showroom. That is where my father Stephen and my younger sister Ashley live. It is a glass-walled sanctuary in downtown Seattle, with polished concrete floors, espresso machines that cost more than my car, and a view of the skyline. That is where they sell the dream. They wear Italian suits and host champagne toasts with developers. They talk about vision, light, and aesthetic purity. To them, the business is a gallery opening. They believe the value of the company lies in the gold-embossed logo on the letterhead. Then there is the kiln. That is my world. It is a sprawling industrial complex in the gritty manufacturing district. It smells like ozone-burning silica and sweat. It is loud, dangerous, and relentlessly hot. Here we don't talk about aesthetic purity. We talk about tensile strength, thermal stress, and the chemical composition of sand. 5 years ago, my father decided that manufacturing was beneath the brand. He called it a heavy asset liability. He wanted to transition Vane into a pure design firm and outsource the actual production to the lowest bidder. He looked at the factory and saw a cost center. I looked at it and saw the heart. So I made him a counteroffer. I used my inheritance from my grandmother and every cent I had saved to buy the manufacturing plant from the family holding company. They laughed at me. Ashley called me the queen of the rust pile. My father told me I was buying a headache while they kept the gold mine. They thought they were dumping dead weight. They didn't realize they were severing their own lifeline. This is what I call the invisible infrastructure paradox. It is a blindness that afflicts people who have never had to get their hands dirty. They value the decoration, but they despise the foundation. They think the skyscraper stands up because of the architect's drawing, forgetting the thousands of tons of steel and concrete buried in the dirt that actually hold the weight. My family loved the prestige of the glass, but they hated the process of making it. They treated the factory like a dirty secret, something to be hidden away. For 5 years, I played my part. I wore steel-toed boots while Ashley wore designer heels. I reinvested every dollar of my profit back into upgrading the tempering ovens and securing exclusive raw material contracts while they drained the showroom's accounts for bonuses and marketing galas. I let them treat me like a vendor. I let them treat me like a servant. I let them believe that because I was invisible, I was powerless. They forgot that the invisible infrastructure is the only thing that matters when the storm comes. You don't notice the foundation until it cracks, and you don't notice the supply chain until it stops. 24 hours before the screaming phone call, I sat in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor, watching the sunlight glint off my father's Rolex. We were gathered for the final strategic review of the Apex Tower project. It was the largest contract in the history of Vane architectural glass, a $10.8 million deal to supply the entire curtain wall for Seattle's newest skyscraper. The mood in the room was celebratory. Ashley was already texting her friends about the commission she would earn on the sale. My father Stephen sat at the head of the table looking like a man who had already spent the money. But when he turned to the agenda item labeled Operational Restructuring, the air in the room shifted. It became thin and cold. "Lauren," he began, clasping his hands on the mahogany table. "We've been looking at the margins for Apex. They're tight. To make this work, we need to lean out our corporate structure." I didn't blink. I had reviewed the numbers. The margins were healthy. Lean out where I asked. Manufacturing efficiency is already at 98%. "Not manufacturing," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Governance. The board feels that having a supply chain manager hold a voting seat and a full equity profit share is redundant. We are restructuring the board to focus on growth and brand strategy. As of today, your seat is being dissolved." The silence that followed was absolute. He wasn't just firing me from a role. He was stripping me of my inheritance. He was demoting me from a partner to a salaried employee, removing my claim to the profits of the empire I helped build. "You're cutting me out," I said. It wasn't a question. "We're optimizing," Ashley chimed in, not even looking up from her phone. "Honestly, Lauren, you just manage the vendors. Dad and I bring in the clients. It's about value add. Why should you get a third of the profit for doing the back-end work?" I looked at my father. I waited for him to correct her. I waited for him to acknowledge the late nights, the logistics miracles, the factory I kept running so they could have something to sell. But he didn't. He just nodded. "We're prepared to offer you a generous severance from the board," Stephen said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the glass table. "And of course, you'll keep your salary as a vendor manager, but the equity stays with the brand." I didn't touch the paper. I looked him in the eye. "You are making a mistake," I said calmly. "The supply chain isn't a line item you can squeeze. It's the oxygen. You cut it off, the body dies." Stephen laughed. It was a dismissive, short sound. He leaned back in his chair, confident in his power, oblivious to the leverage sitting quietly in my pocket. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "We can find supply chain managers anywhere. This is just numbers. Don't take it personal, honey. Business is business." I froze. I engraved those 3 words onto the surface of my mind. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about hardness. He thought he was explaining the rules of the game to his soft operational daughter. He didn't realize he was handing me the weapon I would use to execute him. "You're right," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "Business is business." I walked out of that skyscraper without looking back. I didn't waste time packing personal items. I didn't retreat to the restroom to fall apart. I went straight to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and checked the time. It was 11 in the morning. By noon, I would be at the factory. And by tomorrow, they would learn exactly what business costs. I got into my car and drove 20 miles south, leaving the gleaming glass towers of downtown Seattle for the gray industrial sprawl of the manufacturing district. As I pulled into the lot of the factory, the air changed. It tasted like metal and ozone. This was my kingdom. I walked through the heavy steel doors, and the heat hit me like a physical wall. 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the temperature required to temper architectural glass. It is a heat that burns away impurities. It is a heat that makes things strong. Susan, my plant manager, was waiting for me on the catwalk overlooking the main production floor. She is a woman who has worked in glass manufacturing for 30 years. She wears safety goggles and oil-stained coveralls, and she knows more about the structural integrity of skyscrapers than my father ever will. "They did it, didn't they?" she asked, her voice cutting through the roar of the furnaces. "They did," I said. "They cut me out." Susan looked down at the production line. Huge sheets of raw float glass were moving on the rollers destined to become the skin of the apex tower. "So what's the play, boss? Do we shut down the line?" "No," I said. "We don't shut down. We renegotiate." I walked into my office. It wasn't like the boardroom I had just left. It had concrete floors, a metal desk, and a window that looked out onto the factory floor, not the city skyline. I sat down and opened my laptop. For years, people have asked me why I stayed. Why did I endure the disrespect? Why did I let Ashley take credit for my logistics miracles? Why did I let my father treat me like a glorified secretary with a budget? They saw it as weakness. They saw it as the servant's trap, the idea that I was so desperate for approval that I allowed myself to be exploited. But they were wrong. It wasn't weakness. It was camouflage. I wasn't serving them. I was studying them. I was learning exactly where their vulnerabilities were. I knew that Vane Glass operated on a just-in-time inventory model to maximize cash flow. I knew they had zero stock of raw silica. I knew the Apex Tower contract had a penalty clause of $1.2 million for every week of delay. I endured the disrespect because it made them arrogant, and their arrogance made them careless. They were so busy looking at themselves in the mirror that they forgot to check who owned the glass. I opened the file labeled Rate Adjustment Protocols. I had drafted it 3 years ago just in case. I updated the date, then I updated the pricing fields. Item raw silica and float glass base material. Previous rate market value. Adjusted rate market value plus 400%. Item. Expedited manufacturing and delivery surcharge. Previous rate standard. Adjusted rate standard plus 200%. I didn't bother writing a manifesto about my feelings. I simply attached the new rate card to a formal invoice for the Apex Tower materials. I drafted a short professional email to the Vane Architectural Glass Accounts Payable Department, my father's inbox. Subject: Notice of immediate rate adjustment due to supply chain volatility. I hovered my finger over the enter key. The roar of the tempering ovens vibrated through the floorboards, a low, powerful hum. This was the sound of leverage. I wasn't the daughter asking for an allowance anymore. I was the supplier dictating the market. I hit send. The next morning, the glass house shattered. I was standing on the factory floor, supervising the loading of a standard shipment, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was 8:03 in the morning. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The email had been opened. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By the time I walked back to my office, I had 17 missed calls from my father, 12 from Ashley, and a string of text messages that escalated from confusion to panic to rage. Ashley, Lauren, what is this? Dad is freaking out. Is this a joke, Ashley? Pick up the phone. You can't just change prices like this. We have a contract, Ashley. You are ruining everything. Stop being dramatic and fix this. I sat at my metal desk and drank my coffee. The drama was just beginning. The Apex Tower project was on a critical path schedule. The developers had already scheduled the crane lifts for the curtain wall installation. If the glass wasn't on site in 10 days, the entire construction schedule would cascade into a nightmare of delays. The contract stipulated a penalty of $1.2 million for every week the materials were late. At 9:30 in the morning, my father called again. This time I answered. Lauren, he didn't say hello, he screamed. What the hell do you think you're doing? I just saw an invoice for 400% markup. Are you insane? Good morning, Stephen, I said, my voice steady. I assume you received my notice regarding supply chain volatility. Volatility, he sputtered. You are the supply chain. There is no volatility. You are price gouging your own company. Correction, I said. I am adjusting rates for a client. Vane Architectural Glass is a client. And as a vendor, I have to protect my margins. Raw material costs are up. Labor is up. It's just market dynamics. We have a contract. We had a verbal agreement based on my position as a board member and equity partner, I reminded him. Since that position no longer exists, neither does the discount. I'm operating as an independent third-party supplier now, and third-party suppliers have overhead. You are trying to bankrupt us, he hissed. This is extortion. You're doing this because you're mad about the board seat. Grow up, Lauren. This is business. Exactly, I said. It is business, and my business needs to be profitable. If you can't afford the new rates, I understand. I can cancel the order. You can't cancel. We have a deadline in 10 days. If we miss the delivery window, the penalties will wipe out our entire profit margin for the year. That sounds like an operational risk, I said. Maybe you should have kept a supply chain manager on the board to mitigate that. He went silent. I could hear him breathing hard on the other end. I imagined him in his glass office, loosening his tie, looking at the city view that suddenly felt very far away. Fine, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You want to play hardball. Fine. We don't need you. You think you're the only glass manufacturer in the world. I'll find another supplier. I'll have a contract signed by the end of the day. And when I do, I'm firing you as a vendor permanently. You'll be left with a factory full of sand and no buyers. Good luck with that, I said. Watch me, he snapped. I'll source it from Shenzhen. They'll do it for half your original price. You just played yourself, Lauren. You're fired. The line went dead. I put the phone down and looked out the window at the factory floor. The ovens were glowing orange. My father thought the product was just glass. He thought it was a commodity he could buy off the shelf. He didn't know about the coating. He didn't know about the chemistry. He thought he had just fired me. But he had just walked into the kill box. 3 days of silence followed. It was the quiet of a vacuum before the seal breaks. I spent those days at the factory, walking the floor, checking the inventory levels of raw silica, and waiting. I knew my father. I knew he was scrambling, calling every glass manufacturer from Ohio to Guangdong, looking for a lifeline. On Thursday afternoon, the email finally arrived. It was addressed to me, copying the entire board of Vane Architectural Glass and the project managers for Apex Tower. Subject: termination of vendor relationship. Lauren. We are pleased to inform you that Vane Architectural Glass has secured a new manufacturing partner in Shenzhen. They have guaranteed delivery of the Apex Tower materials within the original timeline at a cost 40% lower than your original rates. Consider this formal notice that your services are no longer required. We will be sourcing all future materials from our new partner. Best of luck with your empty factory. Stephen. I read it twice. I drank a sip of water. He sounded triumphant. He sounded like a man who thought he had won a poker game because he didn't realize we were playing chess. He thought the product was the glass. He thought the value was in the transparency. He didn't understand that the value was in what you couldn't see. I opened my legal folder. I found the document I had filed 3 years ago, long before the Apex contract was even a rumor. It was a patent filing for a proprietary low-emissivity coating compound I had developed with a chemical engineer from UW. We called it Thermal X. The Apex Tower wasn't just a glass box. It was a LEED Platinum certified project. The specifications required a solar heat gain coefficient of 0.2 to 3. Standard commercial glass couldn't achieve that without tinting the view. The only way to get clear glass with that level of thermal performance was to apply my specific patented chemical coating. My father had sold the client on the performance specs. He had sold them on the Vane Clarity promise, but he had never asked how we achieved it. He assumed it was industry standard. It wasn't. It was mine. I hit reply to all. I didn't write a long manifesto. I typed 2 sentences. Attached is a cease and desist order regarding the unauthorized reproduction of United States patent. Number 9402B Thermal X High Performance Coating. Any attempt to replicate this formula via a third-party manufacturer constitutes international intellectual property theft and will result in immediate litigation against Vane Architectural Glass and any partnering entity. I attached the patent. Then I attached a second document, a technical analysis proving that no off-the-shelf product from Shenzhen could meet the Apex specifications without infringing on my formula. I sent the email. Then I forwarded a copy directly to the legal department of the manufacturing firm in Shenzhen my father was trying to hire. International manufacturers are terrified of patent litigation with American rights holders. It shuts down their ports of entry. 2 hours later, the second email arrived. It wasn't from my father. It was a forward from the Shenzhen supplier to Vane Glass, which my father had accidentally, or perhaps hysterically, included in a reply chain. Mr. Morgan, upon review of the patent documentation provided by the rights holder, we cannot fulfill this order. We cannot legally produce the coating required for your project specifications. We are withdrawing our bid effective immediately. Do not contact us again. The lifeline was cut. My father wasn't just facing a price hike anymore. He was facing a complete lockout. He had sold a building he couldn't build. He had signed a contract for a product he didn't own. The glass was free. But the chemistry belonged to me. The deadline was 48 hours away. The $1.2 million penalty clause was looming over Vane Architectural Glass like a guillotine. At 10 in the morning on Friday, a black sedan pulled up to the factory gates. My father stepped out. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of arrogance. His Italian suit, usually impeccable, looked heavy and suffocating in the heat radiating from the asphalt. He was sweating before he even entered the building. He found me by the number 3 tempering line. The ambient temperature on the floor was 110 degrees. I was wearing my hard hat and safety glasses reviewing the cooling fan metrics with Susan. He stood there looking wildly out of place, a relic from a showroom world trying to survive in a kiln. The roar of the machinery was deafening, a physical vibration that rattled the teeth. "Lauren," he shouted, his voice thin against the industrial noise. "We need to talk." I didn't smile. I didn't rush to greet him. I finished my conversation with Susan, signed the clipboard, and then slowly turned to face him. I motioned for him to follow me to a slightly quieter zone near the loading docks, but I didn't take him to the air-conditioned office. I wanted him to feel the heat. I wanted him to sweat. "Please," he said, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief that was already damp. "You have to stop this. You're going to destroy the company. You're going to destroy the legacy. Think about what you are doing to your sister." "I am thinking about the product," I said calmly. "The glass is ready. It is sitting in the warehouse. All you have to do is pay the invoice." "I can't pay that invoice," he snapped, the old anger flaring up before being extinguished by fear. 400% markup wipes out the entire profit margin. It puts us in the red. The board will revolt. "Then the board should have thought about that before they fired their primary supplier," I said. "Supply and demand, Stephen. You taught me that." He stepped closer, trying to play the card he had kept in his pocket for 30 years. He tried to summon the authority of the patriarch. "I am your father," he said, his voice trembling. "Does that mean nothing to you? We are family. You are bleeding us dry. You are killing the golden goose." "The goose was already dead," I corrected him. "You killed it when you decided the person feeding it was redundant. You thought the value was in the name Vane. You forgot that the value is in the execution. You can't build a skyscraper out of a brand name." He looked at the pallets of glass stacked behind me. They were wrapped, tagged, and ready to ship. They were the only thing that could save him, and he knew it. He looked desperate. He looked old. The heat was stripping away his pretense, melting him down to the raw material of a frightened man. "I'm begging you," he whispered, and it was the first time I had ever heard that tone from him. "Be reasonable. Just this once. Lower the price. Give us the family discount. I'll give you your job back. I'll give you a raise." Just help me. I looked at him. I remembered the boardroom. I remembered the coldness in his eyes when he took my equity. I remembered the smirk on Ashley's face when she called me a back-end worker. I remembered the years of sleeping on the office couch while they went to galas. I remembered him telling me not to take it personal. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger. Just the cool mathematical clarity of a balanced ledger. "I can't lower the price, Dad," I said, my voice steady and lethal over the roar of the furnaces. "My margins are tight. And, you said it yourself, don't take it personal. Business is business." Vane Architectural Glass couldn't pay the 400% markup. They didn't have the cash reserves, and no bank was going to loan them emergency funds to cover a supply chain failure they had created themselves. They were insolvent. The Apex Tower contract and the massive penalty attached to it was a financial black hole that would swallow them whole. The only currency they had left was equity. The final negotiation happened in the same glass-walled conference room where they had fired me. But this time the dynamic was inverted. I sat at the head of the table. My father sat on the side, looking deflated. Ashley wasn't even there. She had refused to come, claiming she was too upset, but really she just couldn't handle the humiliation. The terms were simple. Vane Architectural Glass would acquire my manufacturing plant, merging the two entities into a single vertical monopoly. In exchange, I would receive a transfer of majority shares from the existing partners. I didn't take a salary. I took control. I accepted 51% of the voting stock. I restructured the board immediately. Ashley was removed from her executive role. She could keep her title as a brand ambassador, but she had no operational authority and no vote. My father was transitioned to Chairman Emeritus, a fancy title for a retiree with no power. He retained a minority stake for his pension, but he was out of the decision-making loop permanently. The merger was announced 2 weeks later. The industry press called it a bold strategic consolidation. They praised the visionary leadership that secured the exclusive rights to the Thermal X coating. They didn't know the war that had been fought to get there. The Apex Tower glass was delivered on time. The project was a massive success, and as the building rose into the Seattle skyline gleaming and perfect, nobody asked about the sand or the heat or the sweat it took to make it. I sit in my father's old office now. I kept the espresso machine, but I got rid of the Italian leather chairs. I replaced them with simple functional furniture. On my desk, framed in simple black wood, is the original termination letter they tried to give me. It reminds me of the invisible infrastructure paradox. People think power is about visibility. They think it's about the name on the door or the logo on the building. But real power is invisible. It's the supply chain. It's the patent. It's the thing you can't see until it's gone. My family wanted to build a legacy of prestige. I built a legacy of necessity. They wanted to be admired. I wanted to be essential. And now, every time they cash their dividend checks signed by me, they are reminded of who actually built this empire. They are reminded that you can't fire the foundation. If you enjoyed this story of reclaiming power, please like and share. It helps more than you know. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to remind someone that business is business?